Have you ever felt lost in your own life, like you're living a dream, but you no longer know who you are? That's exactly what Monica experienced, a wife who seemingly had it all, a stable life, a reliable husband. But deep down, she was yearning for something else, something she couldn't name. How far can curiosity push us? Can a moment of infatuation destroy an entire marriage? Today, we'll explore a true story, a story of buried secrets, irresistible temptations, and the heartbreaking consequences we face when we cross the line. This isn't just Monica's story, it could be the story of any of us. Let's listen and reflect together. My name is Monica Hayes, and from the outside, my life might seem like a dream come true to many. I live in a peaceful suburb, not too far from Chicago, with David, my husband of 8 years. He's a good man, stable, reliable, and hard-working. We don't have children, but our lives have been quiet and comfortable. Yet, there was something inside me, a sense of unease, an emptiness that I couldn't explain. It all started quite by chance. It was like a small whisper in the back of my mind, something I wasn't seeking or even trying to understand. Then curiosity began to creep in. David and I had been in the same routine for too long. He wakes up at 6 a.m. every morning, eats the same eggs and toast for breakfast, and goes to his job at an accounting firm. In the evening, he comes home, doesn't talk much, not because he doesn't care, but simply because he's exhausted. He sits in his recliner, watches the evening news, and falls asleep before 9. For years, I told myself it was enough. Stability was what I wanted, and love, even if it was somewhat subdued, was still love, right? One day, while mindlessly scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a blog post. It was nothing special, just an article about how women in long-term relationships could reignite their passion. But one sentence struck me. Sometimes curiosity about what you've never experienced is what keeps your mind wandering. It seemed harmless, right? Everyone's curious about something. But that thought haunted me. I began to notice things I hadn't noticed before. The construction workers down the street with their easy laughter and broad shoulders. The barista at the coffee shop who always seemed so confident and sure of himself. And then the men at the gym, their tanned skin glistening with sweat, their laughter echoing in the otherwise quiet space. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown woman fantasizing like a schoolgirl. But I couldn't shake those thoughts. It wasn't just about their looks. It was about their energy, the way they moved through life with an unspoken confidence, a magnetism that drew everyone to them. I told myself it was just a harmless fascination. Everyone has a type, right? But this wasn't just about type. It was about how utterly different they were from David, different from everything I had ever known. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I had joined the gym a month prior, hoping to fill my days with something other than cleaning and cooking. David thought it was a great idea, good for my health, he had said. That day, I was running on the treadmill when I noticed them. 2 men were standing near the weight machines. They were laughing about something, their deep voices echoing throughout the room. One of them, Marcus, had a smile that could light up a room. His skin was a deep brown, and his shoulders seemed to stretch on forever. The other one, Jamal, was taller, leaner, with sharp cheekbones and an intense gaze that made my stomach churn. I tried not to stare, but my eyes betrayed me. To my surprise, Marcus caught my gaze and smiled. "You're doing great," he said, nodding towards the treadmill. I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. "Thanks," I replied. Jamal raised an eyebrow. "I'd say you're killing it," he added. My face flushed. It was just small talk, but their attention felt like sunshine after a long, cold winter. For weeks, I looked forward to those encounters. They were just friendly conversations, nothing more. Marcus would ask how my workout was going, and Jamal would throw in a joke or two. It was harmless, right? But deep down, I knew. The way I lingered near them, the way my heart raced when they smiled at me wasn't harmless at all. One day, as I was leaving the gym, Marcus caught up to me in the parking lot. "Hi, Monica," he said, his voice warm and smooth. I froze. "You remember my name?" I asked, surprised. "Of course," he grinned. "I never forget a pretty face." Those words hung in the air, both electrifying and dangerous. I chuckled, trying to brush it off. "Maybe we could grab a coffee sometime," he asked, his eyes fixed on mine. I should have refused. I should have laughed it off and walked away. But instead, I heard myself say, "Sure, why not?" On the way home, a sense of guilt began to creep in. David didn't deserve this. He had never hurt me, never given me a reason to stray. But the curiosity, the thrill of being noticed, all of that was too intense. That night, as David sat in his recliner, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me, I realized that I had opened a door that I might never be able to close. The next day, after agreeing to meet Marcus for coffee, I woke up with a heavy feeling of guilt. I told myself I wasn't going to go. What was I thinking? It was one thing to enjoy his attention, but meeting him outside of the gym was something completely different. But as time passed, my resolve weakened. I stared at my phone, reading and rereading the text he'd sent me that morning. "See you at 2 at the usual gym parking lot." And at exactly 2 o'clock, I found myself in my car, driving to the gym. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my ears. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Marcus leaning against his car, a sleek black sedan that matched his polished demeanor. He smiled when he saw me, and I felt like I was finally able to breathe. "Glad you made it," he said, opening the passenger door for me. I hesitated for a moment, but then slid into the seat. The interior of the car smelled of leather and his cologne, a combination that made my head spin. "Relax," he said, his voice low and soothing. "It's just coffee." But it wasn't just coffee, and we both knew it. The coffee shop was small, tucked away in a part of town I didn't usually visit. Marcus opened the door for me, and I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and shame as we walked in together. We sat in a quiet corner, and for the first time, I noticed how intensely Marcus was looking at me. His gaze was steady, as if he was trying to see right through me. "So, Monica," he said, leaning back in his chair, "tell me about yourself." I laughed nervously. "There's not much to tell," I replied. "I'm just a boring housewife." "Boring?" He raised an eyebrow. "I don't believe that for a second." I shrugged, trying to downplay the way his attention was affecting me. "Well, what about you? What do you do when you're not at the gym?" "I work in real estate," he said, his lips curving into a smile. "And I play basketball when I can, to keep out of trouble." I chuckled, the tension between us easing a bit. We talked for over an hour, maybe longer. I told him things that I'd never told anyone, not even David. I talked about how lonely I sometimes felt, how my life felt like a series of routines that had lost their meaning. And he listened, really listened, in a way that I wasn't used to. When it was time to leave, Marcus just walked me to my car. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice softer now. "I enjoyed it too," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. My breath hitched, my heart was racing, but he just smiled and stepped back. "Drive safe, Monica." On the way home, my mind was spinning with conflicting emotions. I had crossed the line, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. The following days were a mix of guilt and anticipation. I threw myself into my daily routines, trying to act normal around David, but my mind kept drifting back to Marcus. A few days later, I saw him again at the gym, and it was as if nothing had changed. He greeted me with a casual smile, but there was a new intensity in his gaze. Jamal also seemed to notice something different. "You two have been talking a lot lately," he said, his tone teasing. "Jealous?" Marcus retorted, grinning. Jamal laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe," then he turned to me. "Monica, it's not just Marcus who's fun to hang out with, you know." My face flushed, and I laughed awkwardly. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied. Those remarks seemed light-hearted, but they left me feeling even more conflicted. Part of me wanted to shut this down before it went any further, but the other part, the part that had been dormant for too long, wanted to see where this could go. A week later, Marcus invited me to his place. "It's just a small get-together," he said. "Some friends, good food, nothing crazy." I told myself I was just being polite by saying yes. But when I stood in front of the mirror that evening, carefully choosing an outfit that was both casual and flattering, I knew I was lying to myself. His apartment was in the city, a sleek and modern space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. There were only a few people there, mostly laughing and talking in the living room. Marcus greeted me with a hug. His hand lingered on my back for a moment longer than necessary. "You look amazing," he said, his voice low. "Thanks," I replied, trying to sound casual. Jamal arrived soon after, his presence filling the room with energy. He greeted me with a smirk, and I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on me. The night passed in a blur of laughter, music, and stolen glances. I felt like a different person, a version of myself that I had forgotten existed. But as the evening began to wind down, the reality of what I was doing began to sink in. Marcus offered to walk me to my car, and I found myself alone with him once again. "You're full of surprises, Monica," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. "I mean, you're not as boring as you think you are." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, and I felt myself surrendering to it. When we pulled apart, I was breathless. "I should go," I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Monica." On the way home, tears streamed down my face. I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. The weeks that followed were like an endless tug-of-war inside my mind. I knew what I had done. I knew the path I was walking wasn't one I could easily turn back from. The kiss with Marcus haunted me in a way I hadn't prepared for. I tried to brush it off as a mistake, a moment of weakness, but it was more than just a kiss. It was the beginning of something that was pulling me deeper, with every glance, every touch, every smile. David never noticed. Or maybe he chose not to. He continued his usual routines, his predictable patterns. The loving husband still came home at 6, ate dinner, sat in his chair, and fell asleep to the hum of the television. He didn't see how I was beginning to withdraw from him, how I had become distracted. He didn't know that my heart was no longer in the quiet, predictable life we had built together. And that was the part that hurt. I loved David. I always had. But with each encounter with Marcus and Jamal, I felt myself unraveling. It didn't take long before things escalated. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, couldn't stop the constant pull of desire that seemed to consume me every time I saw him. The gym, once just a place for exercise, became a battlefield, my body aching to be close to him, to feel his touch again. One afternoon, as I was finishing my workout, I found him standing by the weight machines, watching me with an intensity that made my pulse race. "Hi," he said, stepping closer. "I missed you last week." I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the flush of heat that rushed to my cheeks. "I was busy," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't believe it. Busy or running from me? I looked away, unsure how to respond. My heart hammered in my chest. "I'm not running from you," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. He smirked, leaning in just slightly, his breath warm against my skin. "I didn't think so." And just like that, we were back where we started, caught in this dangerous and intoxicating dance. That afternoon, he invited me to meet him again, just the two of us this time. The moment I agreed, I knew I was stepping into territory that I couldn't undo. But the pull was too strong, and I couldn't say no. When I arrived at his apartment, I was both excited and terrified. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. Marcus opened the door with a smile, but his eyes held something darker, something that made the air between us heavy with unspoken promises. He led me inside, and the room was quiet, intimate. There was no music, no distractions, just the two of us. "I've been thinking about you a lot," he said, his voice low, almost gravelly. I tried to hold on to the last remnants of reason to remind myself that this was a mistake I couldn't afford to make. But the way he looked at me, the way his presence seemed to take over the room, made it impossible to think straight. Before I knew it, his lips were on mine again. This time it wasn't tentative. It was desperate, urgent, as if he could feel the same fire inside me that I couldn't control. I could hear my heart beating in my ears as I kissed him back. The world outside of that moment slipped away. I felt alive in a way that I hadn't felt in years. The guilt, the fear, everything faded into the background. There was only Marcus and the intense craving I had for him. The kiss deepened, and I felt his hands on my waist, pulling me closer. His touch was electrifying, like nothing I had ever experienced with David. The way he knew exactly where to touch, how to make me feel like I was the only woman in the world. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to. The next few days were a blur. Marcus and I became more than just gym acquaintances. Our meetings grew more frequent, more intense. We found places to meet, quiet corners in parks, hidden spots at cafes. Each time, it felt like I was surrendering a little more of myself. The guilt weighed on me, but the thrill was too much to resist. And then there was Jamal. I hadn't expected him to get involved so quickly, but one day he caught me and Marcus talking after a workout. The chemistry between us was palpable, and I could feel Jamal's eyes on us. "I think I'm missing out on something," Jamal said, his voice teasing. "You two always look like you're having fun." I froze. Could he tell what was going on? My heart raced, but Marcus just laughed, throwing his arm around my shoulders casually. "You're welcome to join us any time," he said. The words were out before I could stop them, and I felt a sharp pang of panic, but Jamal just smirked. "Maybe I will." From that moment on, things shifted. Jamal began to join us more frequently. He'd show up at the gym, always in the same area where Marcus and I would be. And slowly, without warning, he started becoming a part of the dynamic. The first time we all went out together, it was harmless. Drinks at a bar, some laughter, and a few casual conversations. But I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken understanding that this was more than just friendship. I was walking a dangerous line, and I knew it. One night, after a particularly intense gym session, Marcus texted me, "Meet me at my place." I hesitated, but the desire coursing through me overpowered any rational thought. I drove to his apartment, my mind racing with what I was about to do. I told myself it would be the last time that I would finally end this madness. But when I stepped inside, the door closed behind me, and there was no turning back. Marcus was already there, but Jamal was there too. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, and now I was standing on the edge, looking down into the abyss that I had created. They were both there, two men who knew exactly how to make me feel seen, desired, in a way that David never had. "Relax, Monica," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "Tonight's just about you. Let go." And I did. That night, I crossed into a place where I would never be able to return. The days after that night felt like I was carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets on my shoulders. The guilt settled in with a quiet, suffocating heaviness, pressing on me from all sides. I had crossed a line that I couldn't undo, and as much as I tried to bury it, the truth loomed over me, casting a shadow I couldn't escape. David had started to notice. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the brief moments when our eyes met, and he hesitated. He was no fool, he wasn't stupid. I had tried so hard to pretend everything was normal, to maintain the illusion of our perfect little life, but the cracks were starting to show. The house felt colder, the silence between us heavier. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to sort through some bills, David walked in. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he just stood there, watching me with an unreadable expression. "Monica," he finally said, his voice low, "we need to talk." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling. I knew what was coming. I knew that after everything I had done, I couldn't keep pretending forever. David sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine, trying to read the thoughts I was desperately trying to hide. "You've been distant for weeks," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I can feel it. Something's wrong." I swallowed hard. The guilt surged in my chest, choking me. How could I lie to him? How could I keep up this charade any longer? "David," I started, but the words caught in my throat. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Is there someone else?" I froze. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, my breath catching. I wanted to deny it, to tell him everything was fine, that he was just being paranoid, but I couldn't, not anymore. I don't know what to say," I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. David's face fell. I could see the hurt, the disbelief written all over him. He had always trusted me, always believed in us. I had shattered that trust, and I knew it. "I didn't want this," I continued, my voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to happen, but it did." His hands clenched into fists on the table, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He was fighting to understand, fighting to make sense of everything. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who have you been seeing?" I couldn't bring myself to say their names. It felt like betraying not only him, but also myself. Instead, I just shook my head, unable to speak. David sat back, his face pale, the pain evident in his eyes. "I trusted you, Monica," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought we were happy." "I never meant to hurt you," I said, my voice cracking. "But I have, and I can't take it back." The next few hours were a blur. David didn't yell, he didn't cry. He was silent, cold, distant. It was like he had shut off completely, trying to process the devastation I had caused. And I couldn't blame him. What could he say to someone who had torn apart everything they had built together? That night, we didn't speak, we didn't touch. I lay in bed beside him, my heart broken, knowing that whatever we had, whatever I had, was slipping away. I could feel the distance between us growing with every breath I took. The next morning, things were different. David wasn't home when I woke up. His side of the bed was untouched. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe he had gone to work early. Maybe we could pretend for one more day that everything was fine. But reality hit when I found the note. It was simple, written in his familiar handwriting, and it pierced me like a knife. "Monica, I can't do this. I don't know where we went wrong, but I can't keep living in this lie. I need space, I need time to think. Please respect that. David." My hands trembled as I read it again. The weight of his words sank in. He was leaving. I knew it wasn't a permanent goodbye, not yet, but it felt like the beginning of the end. The next few days were agonizing. David didn't return my calls. He didn't answer my messages. I tried to tell myself that this was just a temporary break, that he would come around, that maybe we could fix things. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Marcus and Jamal both reached out to me during this time. They were concerned, wanted to know what was happening. They sensed the change in me, the way I was pulling away from them as well. Oh, but I couldn't talk to them about David. I couldn't explain the chaos that had consumed my life. The moment I thought I could handle this secret life, it all crumbled. Marcus texted me first. "What's going on, Monica? I don't like the way things are between us." I wanted to respond, to explain, but I couldn't. I couldn't face him, not when I knew I had let it go too far. Jamal tried calling, but I ignored his calls. I couldn't bring myself to talk to him, not when I was unraveling. The guilt was suffocating, and I had no way to fix it. A week later, David came home. He looked tired, his eyes hollow, but there was a clarity in them that made my heart break all over again. "Monica," he said softly, his voice steady but cold. "I think we need to talk." I nodded, my stomach in knots. "I know," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything, and I don't know what the future holds, but I can't keep living like this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know for how long, but I need to figure things out, and I think you do too." My chest tightened, and I felt like the ground beneath me was disappearing. David had always been my anchor, my safe place, but now I had driven him away. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the tears finally falling. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this, David." David didn't say anything more. He just stood up and walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. I sat there, numb. The consequences of my actions were real now. The life I had built with David, the life I had promised to cherish, was slipping through my fingers. I had destroyed everything for a fleeting moment of passion, and now I was left with nothing. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if there was a way back from this, but I did know one thing. I had crossed a line, and the consequences were mine to bear. Thank you for listening to my story. This is where I share my infidelity stories, and where we can reflect on choices and consequences together. If you found this video meaningful, please hit the like button to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next captivating story. What are your thoughts on Monica's story? Please share them in the comments section below. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you so much.